And on behalf of all of our colleagues here at the library and the foundation, I welcome you to this evening's program. Crisis leadership emerged more resilient than before. And I'm proud of all of you for making it here through the traffic this evening. I'd like to thank the New Frontier Network lead sponsor, Energy for the Common Good, for helping make this evening possible. Thank you, Jane. Did you make it yet? She's on her way. The New Frontier Network is a nonpartisan, cross-sector, intergenerational group of people carrying forward President Kennedy's legacy to make a difference and to convene different people together around common values of service, leadership, innovation, and inclusion. I hope the New Frontier Network members will take a moment to stand and be recognized so that you can connect with them in the reception. Following our program this evening, we invite you to join us for the reception in the pavilion. And it is my honor to introduce Rachel Floor, our Executive Director of the JFK Library Foundation. Rachel has been at the foundation for over 16 years and was appointed Executive Director in 2019. During Rachel's tenure, she has successfully led the foundation through the pandemic and has placed the foundation on an ever upward trajectory by introducing new and younger audiences across the globe to President Kennedy's legacy of bold and inspiring leadership. I'm pleased to welcome Rachel to the podium to introduce tonight's speakers.
Thank you, James, and thank you, Maggie, who so ably lead the New Frontier Network and are the core of bringing all of you together so often and in such meaningful ways. Many thanks to the New Frontier Network and all of you for joining us tonight. For over 40 years, the JFK Library has served as a place to gather around insightful discourse, historical perspective, and inspiration to make a difference. The New Frontier Network builds lasting relationships for the future of this institution and for our democracy. And I'm so grateful to all of you who are involved in this program. We are pleased to have two exceptional leaders with us tonight, and I know I can feel the energy in the room here, and you're all here for two very special people who are going to discuss leadership and how to successfully emerge from it, Governor Deval Patrick and Simmons President Lynn Perry Wooten. Governor Deval Patrick, yes, absolutely. Governor Deval Patrick, Professor of Practice and Co-Director of the Center for Public Leadership at the Harvard Kennedy School, served as the first Black governor of Massachusetts from 2006 to 2015, focusing on making the Commonwealth a more equitable place for all of its citizens, particularly on topics concerning healthcare, public schools, and public infrastructure, and initiatives stimulating clean energy and biotech. After public office, Governor Patrick founded and led an impactful investment fund at Bain Capital, the first fund in a major financial institution to focus on both superior financial return and significant positive impact. Since 2020, Dr. Lynn Perry Wooten has served as the 9th president of Simmons University and the first African American to lead the university. An expert in organizational development and transformation, crisis leadership, diversity and inclusion, and positive leadership, Dr. Wooten is an innovative leader and prolific author. She is the recent co-author of Arrive and Thrive, 7 Impactful Practices for Women Navigating Leadership, and The Prepared Leader, Emerge More Resilient Than Before, which will help frame tonight's discussion. Dr. Wooten also serves on the Kennedy Library Foundation's Board of Advisors, and we're grateful for her service there. I would like to sincerely thank Governor and President Wooten for taking the time out of their busy schedules to be with us here tonight this evening. We also look forward to a robust discussion and audience question period tonight. You'll see microphones up here, and we'll let you know the timing when you can come up and ask questions. Before we begin, I would like to frame the 60-year anniversaries we are celebrating around peace and civil rights to remind us how lessons from the Kennedy administration can still inform us today. With the Cold War, civil rights, and the economy, President Kennedy entered the spring of 1963, 60 years ago, with both crisis lessons and ongoing stakes, particularly from the high stakes, particularly from the Cuban Missile Crisis and the integration of the University of Mississippi in 1962. Through this period of global and domestic crises, he exhibited both empathy and strategic steps that led to the partial nuclear test ban treaty, the advancement of civil rights legislation, and the collective responsibility for every citizen and elected official to rise to the challenges of their time. Prepared leadership and courageous public service also embodies our two speakers tonight. Lynn and Deval, thank you for being here today to share your experience and your expertise, and we look forward to your insights.
Thank you, Rachel. Madam President,
Yes, Governor Patrick.
you outranked me, but I drew the straw, so I get to ask the first question. First of all, thank you for being a part of this conversation. Thank you, Rachel. Where'd you go? For the out. Thank you, Rachel, for the very warm welcome, James, to you and all of your team here. And thanks, everybody, for being here. Some of us had some trouble getting through the traffic. Some others are still having trouble getting through the traffic. We're delighted you're here, and as Rachel said, we'll go to the microphone soon because in our preparation, we really wanted everybody to join in the conversation. Lynn, you literally wrote the book, and it was cited by Rachel, The Prepared Leader, How to Emerge from Crisis More Resilient.
Yep,
More resilient, period.
Yep.
Can you talk about the framing of the book and why what the points were you were making, but also where did the book come from? Why did you write it?
So let me put this caveat first. It's easier to write about crisis than lead them, okay? So we all know that. And as Rachel said, my PhD is in corporate strategy, and my co-author, who's the dean of the Wooten School of Business, we've been studying crisis for 25 years. Mm-hmm. We actually started studying with the discrimination lawsuits at Texaco. Yep. Remember that. And that evolved into all different types of crises, natural disasters, product defects, employee crisis. And our first book was written about a decade ago. Mm-hmm. And then we said, it's time for us to write a new book. And this is when I was a dean at Cornell, she was a dean at Emory, and we didn't know a pandemic was coming. But we really wanted to say that the world needed to understand, how do you use crisis as opportunities to be better, to emerge? And so we started writing this book, I would say, in 2019, sketching out the new topics. And there are a couple of things. One, we wanted people to understand there are different types of crisis. There's smoldering crisis and there's sudden crisis. So those smoldering crises are those things we ignore in organizational life, and then all of a sudden we see this big crisis. And then the sudden crisis is a hurricane or a natural disaster or some of the crises we see in our school system. So one is we wanted people to understand the different types of crisis. And then we wanted people to understand the phases of crisis, and that anybody can develop the muscles to lead through crisis. And that's starting with this notion of, signal detecting. We weren't shocked. If you take a reflect back now, people like Bill Gates have been talking about a pandemic for a long time. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of crises where we need to scan our environment, we need to understand, and we need to do signal detection. The second phase we talk about in the book is that you can prepare and plan. If you're watching for the crisis, you should be preparing and planning for it. What are those safety precautions you can do? What are the communication plans that you can have? What are the facility plans you have? Yep. And then, once the crisis gets there, how do you contain it? Because we all are going to lead. Everyday leaders are going to have some type of crisis. But once it gets there, how do you contain the crisis? And then finally, this notion of business recovery. Yeah. When the crisis ends, how do you recover from it? And as we all know, we're not going back to normal in this big global crisis that we lived. Mm-hmm. So therefore, how do we reinvent ourselves? How are we resilient, and what do we learn from it?
You said you got interested in this, focusing originally on the Texaco.
We did.
Crisis. And for folks who may not remember,
because there's some young people here.
Yeah, would you?
Right, there's some young people here.
Would you mind?
So we started with employee discrimination, and this was when we were young assistant professors, and I think it was like 95, 96, because my son, who's an attorney now, was young, and Texaco had this crisis where they had gone through diversity training. And some of the managers and leaders were making jokes about diversity training, and they were saying that, treating employees like jelly beans and all those type of things. And it became a huge racial discrimination.
And it was recorded.
And it was recorded back then. This is before smartphones, for those of you who can't remember life without an iPhone. But it was recorded back then, and they recorded it, and it really escalated to this huge racial discrimination lawsuit where Jesse Jackson got involved and others, and it was a big settlement. And what we were trying to understand is, one, what was the nature of the smoldering crisis? And a lot of times it's organizational culture, bad management decisions. Once the crisis happened, how did they try to contain the crisis? And then what did they learn from the crisis? So in our earlier research, which was about 20 years ago, it seemed that people took a very different strategy for racial crisis over sexual misconduct and gender crisis. And this is what
At
we
that
found.
time.
At that time. Things
Yeah.
have changed now.
Yeah.
Yep. So.
And you remember any of the outcome? Did you do the after?
Yeah, some of the outcome was a lot more diversity training.
Yeah.
Right. Lots of also redesigning, restructuring, engaging, bringing experts in. Is there any particular outcome you wanted me to comment?
Well, you remember that when part of the settlement, this is a detail that is of
Attorney.
interest mostly to me.
Right.
But part of the settlement was to create this special master, which is basically a task force, to monitor the implementation of the settlement agreement. I chaired that task force.
Wow.
Yeah, so I was
We
in
got to
that.
go update our case study.
Yeah, you can drop a footnote at
You
least.
need a footnote, right?
But you talk about the whole business of transforming. This is the great thing to come from that was that crisis was an opportunity
It was.
seized on. Not all crises are, but I think that's one of the points you make. That crisis was used as an opportunity to completely rethink the way hiring and promotion was.
Hiring and promotion and how we value diversity training.
Yeah. When you came to Simmons was not in crisis.
I came in the middle of a pandemic.
Okay, in that sense.
Right.
In that sense, we all were. I take it all back.
So I took the job on February the 6th, and I remember the date because it was my husband's birthday. I think I met her, Lupina, you on that date. And then I came back in March to look for housing. Mm-hmm. And I had to run back to Cornell that same day because we were shutting down the university at Cornell.
Wow.
And when I took the job, people were like, oh, that's just a pandemic in Seattle. That's a little virus. Or, it's in Asia. It's never going to come to the United States because, we don't think everything's going to come to us. And so fast forward, I found myself being president of a university in the middle of a pandemic. And then post-pandemic, now leading small colleges are having to reinvent themselves. So it's a lot of, so the 3 years have felt like crisis leadership.
And would you say that this one was a smoldering crisis, a sudden crisis, or some combination of the two? Did it change from one to the other?
I think when I talked, I would say 80% of my president colleagues, except for the ones who are very rich, it was a smoldering crisis. And I want to talk about the K-12 system in a second. But in higher ed, and I often talk about higher ed, hospitality, and healthcare, the 3 H's that I've seen crisis. In higher ed, we have a system where there's the rich, and then there's everybody else. Mm-hmm. There's the public, and there's the private. And we have underfunded non-flagship public schools and smaller colleges, yet they educate a lot of people.
Yep.
And this is what has happened is that these small colleges are subsidizing through their endowments, through their fundraisings, through lots of debt to educate people that we're not getting funded for. And so the education model is going to have to change. So I would say what small colleges are struggling with, it's been a smoldering crisis.
This is one of the things I noticed in my old job with our public colleges and universities, where most of the students actually stay as compared to the marvelous private institutions that are here, and that the strategy of charge as much as possible for those who can, and make up the difference for those who can't with financial aid. I'm not sure it worked on the private side, but it certainly doesn't work on the public side.
It doesn't work on the public side, and especially the non-flagship public universities are seeing it. And so you go to most colleges now, and what you're seeing is exactly the model. The part of the crisis is it's bimodal, right? You're seeing students who get full financial aid, and then you're seeing the people in the upper income subsidizing those. And very seldom now, especially when I was at Cornell, the first time I saw a middle-class student, I had to turn my head. I saw a student, I said, what do your parents do? She said, my dad's a fireman, my mom's a teacher. And I was like, wow, because we have squeezed middle-class students out of college and they're having to take a lot of debt. So this is definitely a smoldering crisis.
Right, right. And they take debt now at rates it's hard to repay.
It's hard to repay, and it delays a lot of things in life for them. And so, you know, you and I have talked about difficult crisis challenges require what I call a mega community for solutions. Government, higher ed, and the nonprofit have to come together to bring solutions, and higher ed is one. But when you were governor, you did some things around healthcare.
Yes, we did.
Yeah. And you know, this state is the role model for healthcare. And so did you see it as a smoldering crisis? Or how did you approach it?
Well, first of all, kudos to my immediate predecessor, Governor Romney, now Senator Romney. He signed the bill that expanded access. And I remember, you know, it took this, one of the things we talked about beforehand, it took this very broad coalition of policymakers and business leaders and patient advocates and labor, and the interfaith community was involved. A lot of people came together to invent our healthcare reform. It took effect the day I took office, so it was up to us to implement it, which is why I have some irritation that we refer to it still as Romney Care. But this was 2 years before the ACA, and it was an experiment. And we had the advantage we had that President Obama did not, is that this broad coalition that came together to invent healthcare stuck together, because we were refining it as we learned things going along. I think I signed 3 major health reform bills after the first one that Governor Romney had signed, because we were learning things. And the biggest thing, I mean, we knew it going in, but the unsolved issue is cost. Right. You know, and frankly, nationally, if we actually get to universal care, which I hope we do, I think we should, and I think there's more than one model for doing that. We debate now in politics anyway whether it's universal, Medicare for all or nothing. But we haven't even begun to address the question of capacity. You know, we all should have access to primary care. There are not enough primary care doctors. And an awful lot of those doctors are leaving that profession because, frankly, back to the education issue.
It's very, and this is another example. At Simmons, we've been talking a lot about this smoldering crisis of healthcare, and I think the Boston Globe did an article just last week. 1/5 of doctors, primary care providers, plan to leave the field. Right. So we don't have basic primary care, so we have to reinvent the model. It's even
worse for nurses.
Right, nurses, which we know at Simmons. I mean, and nurses is a system approach. We don't have enough nurses professors. We don't have enough nurses colleges. We don't have enough nurses in the field. And so what are we going to do for this smoldering crisis with nurses and physicians? Some healthcare systems, you can't even get a primary care provider. So even if we have universal healthcare, what are the solutions that call for a mega community again?
And to your point earlier, healthcare is one of that handful of big challenges that face not just Americans but humankind, where the solutions will be cross-sector. It's not going to be government alone. It's not going to be the private sector alone. It's not going to be the social sector alone. It's going to be collaboration among and between those sectors. And I think that is for me one of the biggest takeaways of the healthcare experience here.
Yeah, and with the healthcare experience, it's also nested right where we have to think about the individual and how we change individual well-being in healthcare, and that has gotten more attention in the pandemic. Some of healthcare has to be rooted in the communities, and we know different communities need different types of healthcare. And then
but the community basis actually shows great outcomes.
Great outcomes, right. Just like nurses and midwives ensure great outcomes. And so we have to change the model. And if we can start with primary care in this crisis and move on to that being the model.
Do you think, this was not in our brief, but it's on my mind as I listen to you and I reflect on the question. Do emergencies in general, smoldering or sudden, do they present opportunities for system change?
They do.
They do.
They do, and in a second, I want to turn it back to you. See, we're bouncing each other, and I want to hear about your experiences with the Boston Marathon Bond. But let me talk about systems. Part of, being president of a women's-centered college and always doing research on women, I've thought about how do we create women-friendly workplaces. And before the pandemic, people said we could never work remotely. We could never have flex and 4-day week. We can't do meetings on Zoom. Well, what has the pandemic done? And it has made workplaces more flexible, more what I call women-friendly, more where people can live an integrative life and take care of their parents and take care of childcare.
Yeah.
So that's one of the opportunities we've seen from the pandemic.
I sit on the board of a tech company out on the West Coast, and I joined that board during the pandemic. I actually just met the other board members in person a couple weeks ago. And we added something like 40% of the workforce during the pandemic.
Without seeing them, right?
Exactly. And they'd never seen the office. And then as the pandemic was subsiding and some of the precautions, we were relaxing. The CEO, on his own, decided to tell everybody, you have to come to the office.
And nobody wanted to come back, right?
And 40% of the employee base said, no, thank you. We want to work someplace where we can be flexible. And I'm trying so hard not to be a yesterday guy. I don't want to turn into one of those guys who says, my day, But
you had to walk to school both ways up the hill.
Exactly, right? exactly, without shoes. I'm not that. Really, there is a team building kind of thing. It's a human personality.
There's some things we do in person, but
right. So, you must be thinking about this too in the context of what makes a successful woman-friendly or modern worker-friendly workplace, but also enables people to have the team building.
Yeah, and so it's the balance. It is, do we need 3 days in the office or 2 days? But there's some things that in person, our leadership team, we have started to meet in person more. And because we were always on Zoom, and we found that we're more productive. We're getting more done. We like that touch. But there are some days where, I think most of us like having our Friday or Mondays to do things.
We're never getting Friday.
We never.
That's not
And so this is an example of a crisis being an opportunity. And there are multiple opportunities. The classic one for those of us who teach crisis leadership is we talk about the Tylenol. This is even data-defined Texaco. And how some of you may not notice, but before Tylenol and cyanide was put in it, we never had safety things. And so people could put something on it. So this is another example of products and technologies becoming better.
They did a brilliant job. I mean, it's also one of the examples used on managing through or leading through a crisis, because they were very transparent. They talked about it. They made that big, hard call early about the product recall, as I remember, right? Which was a costly.
It was very
decision.
costly.
Right.
It's very costly. And we talk about in the book costly crisis decisions that come out better. And I don't know if you like basketball. Do you like basketball?
What kind of question is that?
What kind of question is that, right?
What am I to say?
So look at the NBA bubble.
Yeah.
That's an example of, they realized that with the pandemic, we couldn't have a basketball season. Yeah. But this creative way, we're going to ship everybody to Orlando. We're going to create this bubble. We're going to follow the best protocol. And we're going to have a basketball season and save the league. So it's creativity, it's resourcefulness. Some of the guiding principles I talk about leading in crisis have a theory of change. Yep. And as you say, once you have that theory of change, execution is key. Let the theory be guided by data and communicate what you're doing.
I realize this is a nonpartisan event. And what I'm about to
Rachel
say
said that earlier.
This is not a political comment, but I think if the former president had managed the COVID crisis differently on a national scale, he'd be president right now.
Oh, yeah. I agree with you. Yep. Because we are a society who likes heroes. And if you can do something well, we reward you with a vote.
Huh. I wasn't going to go that far. You might be right. But I think that one of the things that happens in crises, and I've been thinking about this in the run-up to our conversation, and because we are coming up on the 10th anniversary of the marathon bombing.
Right.
One of the things that happens in that happened in that crisis is there is an awful lot of quite justifiable fear
Yeah.
and anxiety. And you see sometimes in politics that is a sort of a time-honored tool to get attention, to divide, what have you. And it would be easy at a time like that for us to turn on one another rather than to one another. And I think one of the best things about our team's response and our support during that time in a period of tremendous uncertainty, and when a lot of decisions had to be made without complete information, was that we kept trying to encourage folks to see the importance of being one community, of sticking together, of actually behaving as a community, of being a part of the response and the recovery. And there were lots of specific examples of that, but I think that had a whole lot to do with why Boston Strong, as we say, was what it was.
Yeah, I was thinking about Boston Strong, and you know, in a crisis situation, you called it out. We have to acknowledge we're all going to have fear. And the classic example I use is, how many of you were hoarding paper towels and toilet papers when the pandemic, right? Okay,
I'm not raising my hand.
And so we all have fear. We have paralysis analysis. We hide under the table. We deny the crisis. We hoard. We become very myopic. Acknowledge the fear. Give yourself grace. Give your community grace. But then take yourself back and say, okay, there's a new world order. And what do I have to learn in this crisis situation, and who do I need to partner with? And so in the Boston Marathon, you had to learn new protocol. You had to understand the root cause of the crisis. You had to come up with solutions. And then once you identify what you have to learn and who you're going to partner with, the real trajectory is how you're going to grow, how you're going to become better. Because resiliency is not just bouncing back. It's growing, and think about all the growth and things you learned because of the Boston Marathon incident.
Do you think for the smoldering crises, I'm thinking of chronic poverty, for example, that the same takeaways are there? In other words, that you have to acknowledge it as a crisis, that you have to call it out, you have to...
Yeah. I definitely, you think of chronic poverty, and one that I've been worried about is I grew up in Philly, educated in the public school system the majority of my life. Look at the K-12 system now. It's a smoldering crisis, right? And I think we're stuck. We almost feel like we're paralyzed with the public school system in the United States. And we need to stop and say, okay, what do we need to do to make it better? In your administration, when you were thinking about public education in the K-12, what were some of the strategies you thought about for this continuous smoldering crisis we've seen the last 2 decades?
So I think we did a lot of things right, but we didn't get everything right. We've been on a journey here in Massachusetts of public education reform for a long time.
I mean, Massachusetts is the role model for integration.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it is.
I think
People,
you have to be careful about saying that here.
Right.
You could say that about Massachusetts in Michigan.
right. You know, as a child growing up in Philadelphia, they imitated you.
No, I get it.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
Also, you know, you get a lot of eye rolls.
I
That's
know.
why I'm looking at you, not them. I mean, we had a lot of plans coming into office, and 15 minutes after I was elected, the bottom fell out of the global economy. Wow! So we were in the middle of the Great Recession, and we had promised to support funding for the public schools at historic highs, and God bless them, the legislature kept that promise, but it meant having to cut lots of other things. Now, I should say, we were able to keep that promise in part because of the Obama administration's rescue plan. So we were using those funds to keep the spending levels up. But it's never just about money. It never has been just about money. It's
No.
There are ideas and time and creativity that was needed, because for all these years that we had bragging rights as being first in the nation in student achievement, we had persistent achievement gaps. And the kids in those gaps were consistently poor. They spoke English as a second language. They
And they
had
were a
special
color.
needs, right? And the point I was making, look, those are our kids too. We look away from that because we got these bragging rights, but those are our kids too. And again, collaboratively, with the help of the charter folks and the teachers unions and the parent groups and the business communities and policymakers and so on, we came together and created this thing called the Achievement Gap Act, which created all kinds of tools and accountabilities for groups of teachers, groups of parents, school leaders to try new things to try to meet kids where they were. One of the best examples of success, and I will say I don't think it's been sustained, but the model was right.
It's having that model is important.
Well, and there were proof points. It was one of the best examples I was going to say is a school called Orchard Gardens here in Boston, which was described. The way I say this laughingly because it's just amazing what comes out of people's mouths. If folks pointed to what was, going sideways in the Boston public schools, then frequently you'd hear folks in the Boston public school system say, "At least we're not Orchard Gardens." It was that complicated, and I went out to visit them because I was told after this bill being in effect for a year that they had used every tool, every single one of the tools in the bill. They'd gone from one of the worst in the city to one of the best in the state in 1 year. I went out, I was just dazzled by what they had. Terrific leadership, they had engaged faculty, the parents were being brought back into the conversation and in the school community. City Year was brought in to help with the truancy issues, so if somebody was out, somebody went to get them. It's like the old neighborhood. Somebody showed up and said, "What? You're not where you're supposed to be." They were all, they extended the day. They brought art and music and exercise back in, and it was an alive school community. It was just brimming with energy, and I think an incredibly important that I had an opportunity to sort of lift them up as an example to show people what was possible. That you didn't have to be stuck in low expectations or yesterday's stats, that kind of thing. There were other examples. I don't think there were enough, to tell you the truth.
Sounds like another case study for one of my books. Deval.
Maybe.
So we're in the Q&A time. We want people to start to come up for questions.
Did you get the sign?
She held up the sign. She's right.
Didn't mean to call attention.
But as people are coming up, your story about that school really does speak to, we know public education was a smoldering crisis. There was a theory of change. There were best practices. You executed it well, and you used the data. And that's what being a prepared leader entails.
I believe that. But again, I don't want to overstate.
You got to sustain it, right?
That is where I was going. I think change has to be about not what you do in time for the next bragging session or the next election cycle. It's what you do for the next generation. Yeah. Hi.
All right. I'll start off. Is this on? Or?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. I'll start off with an easy one. What are your thoughts on the climate crisis from a smoldering and now more sudden crisis perspective? And what would your advice be to leaders who are trying to navigate that?
Climate change is the classic one of smoldering and sudden, like you said. We see it with the weather patterns, but this is something we knew it was coming. And so therefore, one, we have to call leaders. We have to do something about it. We have to know, what's our theory, what are the best practices, and how are we going to tackle it? So every leader now, no matter if you're a president of a university like me or running a country, has to think about the smoldering crisis for the climate change and what you're doing for it. And it's one of the ones we neglect the most. I think we're in denial about it. What do you think, Deval?
I agree. Say your first name.
Todd Hines.
Todd. Is your first name Todd Hines, or you just? Todd, is it all right if I call you Todd? I think, Todd, that I agree with everything Lynn said, and I think that sometimes our approach is to feel unless we have a complete solution, that the individual thing we do or the thing we do at, in our office in our university, isn't meaningful, and therefore we should do, or that we're not getting the kind of leadership at the highest possible level at any given time we want, and so everything is, or a lot is hopeless. And I feel like there's a, to the point about acknowledging the crisis, we're going to get a lot of people to acknowledge, but not everybody, and so what?
Yeah.
We still have to move, and we must each do what we can, and I think the most helpful leaders are the ones who tell us what we can do individually, what we can do in our offices, what we can do at the state, at the municipal, state, or national level, and international level. And it reminds me, as the last thing I'm going to say, there's a wonderful writer, Anand Giridharadas. I heard him give a speech some years ago now at the Obama Foundation Summit, and he talked about how excited he was that progressive causes, who would have thought climate change counts as even it's like, you know, we politicize pandemics.
Right.
I guess we politicize the climate now. But that progressive causes we're seeing their time had arrived. And he said how exciting it is that we are all so woke, his term. His question, which I think is an important one, is, will the woke leave room for the still waking? Is part of the job in politics and at a time of crisis, persuading, bringing other people along, even if they aren't already there. Does that make sense?
I think the other thing is society, we have to learn how I've been saying to my team to be a good ancestor. So it's not only solving the problems of the day, but it's solving for the future and leaving it for the next generation. And the climate change is one where we have to own that.
Yep.
Hi, Jane Hotchkiss, and this is a perfect tee-up. I am the president of Energy for the Common Good, and we are a nonprofit working on fusion. And we're early in the space. We started quite a while ago. And
At MIT?
well, I don't, no, I'm not at MIT. We're a nonprofit, standalone. But yes, we knew the folks at MIT. We were very actively involved in encouraging the physicists there to understand that there was an opportunity to put all of that science to work. But so many threads of your conversation make me want to ask both of you, thank you both for your leadership. We, as a nonprofit, working on perhaps the hardest part, I think, of a new technology, a new energy source, a solution, which is the public. And we formed this because, in part, my background in renewables and ultimately in development of renewables saw, you know, the dirty secret is not just the natural gas that gets placed to support it, but it's also that so many projects don't actually get built because development is really hard, and it's messy because guess what? It involves all of us. And we don't like change, which is a thread that I've heard, you know, the making room for those who are still waking. And I don't worry so much about climate change being somebody's issue or not, because the atmosphere is doing it. And it doesn't matter if I count it or how we do the numbers. It's still happening.
Right.
But our challenge is, as a public-facing nonprofit, we have an invisible problem and we have an invisible solution. Now, I'm quite convinced after 30 years of renewables that we need fusion. But how do you advise us to enter this space with communities? What we've done is started on education, because that's a gift we can give any K through 12 school system.
Okay.
And if it goes no further, we've given them STEM tools and a solution to something they all know about.
Okay.
But what else would you suggest we do to nudge, maybe not wake, but nudge the rest of the population to think about the fact that there are solutions coming and that they can do something with it?
You know, it really does start with, I think, communities and one person and getting the story out there. And having a story that touches people to say, I have a role in this, and I want to see this is why we need to change. But educating people, creating these learning communities of practice is what I would advise.
Yeah, so you live here in Massachusetts?
Mm-hmm.
You remember we were working on wind as a part of our
Believe me,
stuff?
I was working, I remember Jim Gordon back
Yeah.
at Cape Wind Days.
So
yes.
and I spend time in the Berkshires.
Yeah.
In the Berkshires, they thought wind turbines in Cape Cod Sound were a great idea.
Of course.
On Cape Cod, they thought wind turbines in the Berkshires was a great idea. Nobody thought it was such a great idea in their
Next to-
neighborhood. So that's human. That we can work through, and depending on the project. I think the harder idea is how we think about inventing our own future. Crisis can accelerate that.
Yeah, that's a good point.
But you know, it's somebody. I remember this wonderful line that my Secretary of Energy and Environmental Affairs said once. He said, "You know, the Stone Age didn't end because we ran out of stone. It ended because we got a better idea."
And that's what I hope.
And
yeah.
I think there is something to this idea of teaching people. In your case, in the case of fusion, not your case, but in the case of fusion, that's a better idea. I think making it, what it is we do between now and the time fusion becomes real, which I think is what Todd was getting at, I think also has to be a part of that conversation.
And that's the hard part.
But the idea that we can have a future, that crisis compels us to imagine a future of energy security, independence, and safety from a climate point of view. That I feel like that's happening, and where the different technologies fit in that is, I guess today, you guys' problem. Thank you, Jim. Should we go from side to side?
I'm gonna help.
So we shouldn't, or we should?
No, you can, go ahead.
Good evening. Thank you for your time. So in my line of work in emergency management, we often talk about these gray rhino events. So highly probable, highly impactful, yet neglected crises, whether natural, man-made, et cetera. So my question really is how do we, folks working in emergency management, to prepare for or respond to and recover from these incidents and crises, how do we strike that balance in waving the flag to those leaders, especially in the political space, when they're juggling all of these priorities? Oftentimes, investing in disaster preparedness or crisis management is a long-term investment, and oftentimes some of these decisions, are short-sighted or nearsighted. So, how do we continue to stress the importance of investing dollars now to make that long-term investment, so that when this big disaster comes, the Boston Marathon bombing or the blizzards of 2015, et cetera, how we're positioned better?
So, the notion of the book Prepared Leadership came up from the 4th P. I've spent all of my life teaching business school students. And in business schools, we teach managers like your boss, first you got to have the profit. That's the first P. You got to take care of your people and invest in people. Third, now we talk about investing in the planet. But the 4th P that we're calling every leader to do is to be a prepared leader. People, profits, planets, and then prepared leaders. So how do you create and invest in those systems that you're ready for these crises that you had? Becoming a high reliability organization. Making the time, you probably just did this when you were governor, to do worst case scenario planning. Tabletop, sensitivity analysis, simulations. And so it's got to be on everybody's radar that this 4th P is a part of your leadership practice. So you can tell them to read my book. What do you think?
Well, say your first name. Did you say I missed it?
Christian.
Christian, I remember you mentioned the marathon bombing. There were a couple hundred people with injuries that would have been life-threatening. We lost 3 people on site, but injuries that would have been life-threatening, and none of those people, all of them made it to hospital, and none of them died. When I visited one of the hospitals in the aftermath to talk about that, they said, well, in fact, we executed the disaster plan your administration put in place. I didn't even know. But how to triage so that the people with certain acuities got to the hospital that was right for them. Now, we had other happy coincidences, if that's the right way to even describe it. There, it happened at the finish line near the medical tent. There are a whole bunch of ambulances present anyway. But people had practiced how to respond. We did tabletop exercises of a variety of kinds when I was in office. In fact, it was the conversation I first had with my successor. I said, don't wait until you are sworn in. Do some tabletop right now with the folks from MEMA in particular. I really, you got to shake sometimes those political leaders, because they are, more and more of these jobs are such where it's hard to distinguish between crisis and routine.
Right, it becomes your everyday.
Stuff is coming so fast. But sometimes I feel like the crisis managers in public life can get the point across to the political leader that there are political consequences of failing in managing a crisis, and all of a sudden you get people's attention.
Thank you.
Yeah. This is off the record, right?
Hi, my name is David McCullough. I run a national nonprofit, and we run our programming in high schools all across the United States. We're also a fully remote organization, so a lot of the crises I manage are with people that I've never met, and crises that I've never seen and that I'll never get to see firsthand. President Wooten, you used the words communicate, and communicate today, and Governor Patrick, you talked about all of the different entities involved and all the chaos during and the weeks ensuing after the bombing. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what good and bad communication looks like during a crisis from a leader.
So I think good communication is you show your vulnerabilities. You let people know they're not perfect. You're honest with them that this is the plan today, but things may change. Because you don't know, right? It's building the bridge as you walk on it. Why do we like Dr. Fauci? Because when he showed up every day, for that particular day, he was honest. He had an expertise mentality, and he showed us the data. And so having compassion, having honesty, and putting your best foot forward are some of the best communications. And there's sometimes as a leader you can't communicate, but you tell people, I can't tell you everything now, but when a time comes, I will communicate it with you.
I agree with that so much, David. You cited the marathon bombing. We were doing briefings knowing we didn't have any new answers. People asked the same questions or questions in different ways, and we had to, and I was careful not to overstate, not to oversell what we were doing, and to be direct if there was something I did not know, or that we did not know.
And it's okay to say, I don't know, but I'm working on it.
Right. Thanks.
Good luck.
Good evening. My name's Katie. I am a member of the New Frontier Network.
Katie.
And I'd love your input on what I'm considering to be a smoldering crisis. And since we're here in a library, I feel we would be remiss if we didn't talk about the undercurrent of threat to intellectual freedom and the ability, the capacity, the resiliency to participate in discussions, conversations like this. And again, I would go so far as to say Massachusetts is a leader in terms of intellectual freedom. I think we value literacy. I did serve on the Massachusetts Literacy Task Force way back when. And I'm just very concerned that there is a smoldering crisis where there will be a huge force that will be continuing its efforts to squelch our ability to just talk to each other in peace. Yeah. And I really want to bring that forward because the work of the American Library Association, and we think of Simmons, and we think of the dean of the college there, and we know that we invested so much time in cultivating leaders to be in libraries of all types and be on the front lines. Those frontline people are feeling very alone right now. And so I'm just wondering, is that on your radar? How can we bring, going back to what Ms. Hotchkiss was saying, how do we bring the greater community to the aid of some frontline people who know what's coming? So just wondering if you think about it.
I definitely think about it. I was going to let the governor handle this, but I tell you one of the things is that we're tired, right? But we see this smoldering crisis. I mean, we're still so tired from the pandemic, but I sit on the Boston Public Library Board. After education, if there's any institution that changed my life, it was books and libraries. And to see what's happening, you're right, Massachusetts is like a bubble. But you look at the rest of the world, what's going on, just think book bannings. We are in a crisis, and I think we got to get the energy up to fight it.
And you're not, and I'm thinking it's not just on the people in that workplace.
Oh, no, yeah.
It's the
It's
users,
societal, it's K-12,
governing
yeah.
bodies. It's not just school districts. And I think it's being echoed.
Literally.
But yeah, so.
I mentioned earlier, fear is a time-honored political tool. And we get so-called leaders today using fear to divide us. We're afraid of each other. You said we should get together in environments like this to talk to each other. I think we've forgotten how to talk to each other. I think we are, I'm maybe not you, but I think to myself now, have I already said something stupid that somebody, or something imprecise, that then gets reduced into some tweet and gets sent
Or
around? I tell my
YouTube, yep.
students, just put your stuff down. Let's talk to each other instead of about each other for a change. Let's try that. We're out of practice. Well, I don't know why we're so afraid. I don't know why we're afraid of each other. I don't know why we're afraid of our history. All of it. I don't know why we are afraid of a different point of view. Wasn't it Louis Pasteur who said that education is learning to listen to anything without losing your temper or your self-confidence? We need to be educated that way. But we get peddled fear. And by the way, the fear and division peddled on social media is amplified by social media. Say or do something kind, and the algorithm ignores you. The few people who are your cousins who signed up to like will hear about that and won't believe it.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Olivia, and at the fear of not being precise, I've written some of my,
See?
my questions down. So I'm hoping that we could hear more from the two of you about building a mega community. And, specifically, at least, for me, the women-friendly workspaces, which, again, for me, feels like we have to then talk about childcare and the prohibitive cost of childcare.
Yes.
And, like our wonderful leaders in Massachusetts are saying, childcare is infrastructure. And how do we fix infrastructure without a community? And, just specifically when it comes to children and their safety and who's taking care of them, and something that feels like it should be so protected and so universally agreed on, it just, it clearly isn't. And so I'm hoping that you could speak more to the mega community after the marathon, or in general.
Do
Yeah.
you mind if I start?
Yes, please
'Cause
do.
I thank you, Olivia, for your question. I want to just express how I think about community, because I think it's I have to go there, and often did when I was in office, on my way to the policy question, if that's what you're getting at. When I was growing up on the south side of Chicago, every child was under the jurisdiction of every adult on the block.
Same thing for me in Philadelphia.
Yeah,
Right.
We had Ms. Jones. You messed up down the street in front of her stoop. She went upside your head as if you were hers.
Right.
And then she called home, so you got it 2 times.
Right.
Some of you are nodding your heads.
Yes.
What they were teaching was that community is understanding you belong to each other.
Yep.
We belong to each other. We don't talk like that in public life anymore, but people are hungry for it, And I had a long briefing this morning on a research project I'm doing, we're calling Shared America,
Wow.
that confirmed that very point. We are the social isolation, the economic insecurity, the despair as measured by things like suicide rates or addiction rates that are now offered as the so-called grievances of white working people are the same things black and brown people in cities have been feeling for generations. Yeah. And the fact that we're not calling that out as a common hurt on the way to community is a huge missed leadership opportunity, I believe. Now, we asked the schools, we were talking about the public schools, we asked the schools to do today what whole communities used to do.
Exactly.
Without actually building out the education system and investing the time and the talent to make that possible. There is absolutely no reason why a great primary school couldn't have space. Well, in some cases there is a reason for space, but if there's space and certainly time by extended day and additional personnel to make a place for a family who has a toddler and a kindergartner. Do you understand what I'm trying to say?
Affordable space.
Affordable space, which is the other thing. And what are we talking about? We're talking about making available to everybody what everybody in Milton, where I lived and raised my kids, do for their kids. So that our daughter, we were talking about our kids earlier, what the choices they make. They couldn't make it work with our grandkids without their grandmother. They couldn't. And my mother lived with us for 20 years. Yeah. I'm not sure we could have, proving my wife is a saint. I'm not sure we. I was going to say, God bless her. Yeah. I'm not sure we could have made it.
So your new project's called Shared what?
We're calling it Shared America.
Tell us more about that, because everybody in my Simmons team knows community is one of my top values, and nothing happens without these mega communities. And I was raised the same way by 100 mothers.
Yeah, yeah, and I think we have to lift that up and make it an expectation. We're still. I would say our project is a project forming a project right now. We're trying to. It's a democracy-related project, because I think that is. If we don't have community, we're not going to have a democracy. We're not
right.
It's not going to matter. What we are finding is that the sense that we don't have connectedness sufficient to address our smoldering crises, like child care, like early child education and child care, like the quality of the public schools.
Well, you wait till you get
like
my
the
age.
Climate issue.
I tell you what's worse than child care, elder care.
Mm.
Yeah. Which is scary.
Yeah.
And that's, once again, we don't have a shared community stepping up to say, how do we take care of our elders?
I know. Well, I said my mother lived with us for 20 years. I'm not sure my children would let us in. Not for that length of time.
No, my kids already said they're not letting me in.
Not for that length of time.
She's the nurse and he's the last one.
Okay.
Hello, my name is Malika Lucian, and I work for the now Governor Healy, and I just wanted to get your advice on what you wish you had known in the first 6 months, and maybe any advice for a staffer as they're heading into a budget review process.
Oh, he's got all the answers.
Oh my goodness. You want to take that one?
No, you're the expert there.
No, this we did talk about in advance of today. I found that the greatest power I had was an unwritten one, and that was the convening power. Yeah. Right? You could get anybody to accept your invitation and come sit at the conference table, and frequently with people they would never sit with otherwise, and to problem solve together. And I can point to a number of outcomes, notable ones and ones you wouldn't know about, that happened just that way. It was a blast. We weren't trying to. Just come clean. I've never been that interested in abstract policy. I'm interested in policy where it touches people. What happens when it gets down to the ground, and can you see that? And how do we make that happen? And those sorts of solutions, whether they are to smoldering crises or lesser things, require that kind of collaboration. People teach you things. You learn things. They learn from each other. And so I wish I had understood that sooner, and I've gotten more traction sooner. We can talk about the amateur mistakes offline, but that one in particular.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about this in planning, using the power of convening. You know, you're in the governor's office. People will come. They'll give you their advice. They'll problem solve with you. They care about the situation. So use it as your competitive weapon.
Thank you guys so much.
Good luck.
This young man's closing us out here.
Yes, thank you.
Hi.
My name is Sterling Bland, and I'm a senior at Harvard University, and I'm here with some other students. My question is really coming from the perspective of a generational African American and also just a person of faith on campus. I'm thinking of Good Friday coming up, Easter around the corner, and there's a scripture that comes to mind that goes, "Hope deferred makes the heart sick, but a longing fulfilled, that's a tree of life." And I think the experience of many generational African Americans on campus has been pretty despairing recently. I'm thinking about the challenge to race-conscious admissions, and generational African Americans already, it's hard to find statistics on this, but just by observation, it's pretty clear that we're grossly underrepresented on campus. So that's sort of like an impending crisis. But the other crisis is just one that I think is reoccurring that we actually just got news about over the past couple of days. There's been a raid on our campus where someone called the police and, you know, lied to them about some sort of a situation, and it ended up with the police entering a student's dorm, a group of our friends of generational African Americans, most of them, who are all living together in this dorm with guns because they had heard a call saying that someone was after the students. And so there's just been a lot of trouble, I think, and a lot of despair.
This happened recently?
Yeah, this happened a couple of days ago, 4 a.m. in the morning, a couple of days ago. And our campus is just hearing news of this. So I'm wondering where you get your vision from, and in a situation like that, what can we do to come together as a community and build vision?
Yeah. You know, I feel your pain. My own daughter's a junior at Brown, and she's been leading a lot of the rallying about affirmative action and the racial relations going on campus there. And one is that I give kudos to the current generation of college students because they will call us out. They will show up. They will protest. They will have a voice. So keep on doing the work. I'm a Generation Xer. We didn't do that. Maybe your generation did, but we didn't do that.
What are you trying to say?
So continue to do the work. You have to be out there. You have to be front and center. It's community building. It's coalition building, as Gantz talked about. It's challenging the status quo. I often talk about the pandemic, but remember we had a pandemic in the middle of a racial and social reckoning. And if we don't do this now, the vision and keep hope alive, it'll never be done. So protesting, meeting with administration, but don't only come with your problems. I'm speaking as a university president now. Come with solutions also. So.
Sterling, first of all, I'm heartsick learning. Sorry? I'm heartsick learning about this raid. I can't imagine what the impact on those students, the students who were on the the other end of that will feel and will feel over time, and how that shapes their or impacts their the way they think about Harvard, the way they think about college, the way they think about being black, so I'm worried about that. I'm worried about the attack on affirmative action because this is just one of those things we don't ever seem to move beyond. You know, generally, if we acknowledge, hasn't always been universally the case in America, but generally if we acknowledge we have a challenge in America, we tend to try to solve it rather than leave the solution to chance, which it seems like we're the opposition to affirmative action prefers. I will say two things. You asked a question about where my own hopefulness comes from.
Yes.
One, on race in particular, we are funny in this country. Well, I could stop right there. But just in acknowledging simultaneously the progress we've made, much of it in my lifetime. Yeah. In my lifetime. And at the same time, the progress that remains. Both things are true. Both are true. And that brings me to the second thing. When I think about my ancestors and yours, talk about being a good good ancestor, I feel like I'd have a lot of nerve to give up now, to stop being hopeful now. I mean, think about what they faced to make it possible for you and me to sit in a room like this.
Right.
Think about that.
That's the hope.
And and so it's incumbent on me to keep my own hope up. I am also a person of faith, and there are lots and lots and lots of lessons in the good book about what the sowing of good seeds yields, because we do reap what we sow. And we can't just have the folks who sow the poisonous seeds. We can't just yield the field to them. I'm messing up the metaphor, but you understand what I'm saying. We can sow better seeds. We have that power. We're given that power. And if all we do is sow one seed, that's one seed. But somebody else sowed one or two seeds to reap us. Do you understand what I'm saying? Yeah. So we should be sowing those same.
You know, I want to close with what one of my sorority sisters gave me a card that I have in my office, and that card says, "The ancestors moved mountains for you to get here, and every day I got to move mountains for you guys." And that's how we play it forward.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Keep the faith.
Thanks.
Deval and Lynn, thank you so much for being here with us tonight and for sharing your experiences. We really are grateful to you. I'd also like to thank the NFN members who are here with us tonight and the library members who are here with us tonight for all you do to continue President Kennedy's legacy. We're so grateful for what you do for the JFK Library Foundation and to help us share what is possible by following President Kennedy's legacy. To go to the reception and to exit the theater, I'm going to ask all of you to use the center aisle and exit at the doors at the top of the steps. If you are going to the reception, you can go through the lobby and make a right at the store, and then follow the signs to the stairs that will lead you into the pavilion. There's also an elevator there if you need that. But again, thank you very much for being here with us tonight. And
thank you.